Right. Um, Last one are we doing for Germany, which is going to be kind of like life in Germany. So policies towards women, the youth, etc. So education, that kind of thing. Okay. First thing is to understand what the position of women are in Nazi Germany, and that is very much to be at home, looking after kids, supporting the husband, right? And this isn't an idea that women are lesser than men. The Nazis believed they just had a certain role in society, and that was to, increase the population. And Hitler wanted to do that because there was an increase in a decrease in the population, and Hitler wanted to, he wanted more soldiers. Again, this is the graphic of the differences. You should be aware of this already. So again, peruse at your own leisure. Okay, so 34, the Nazis then appoint the Reich's women leader, who is Gertrude Schultz Klink, to oversee these policies related to women. Now, she created this new women's organization called the German Women's Enterprise, and it gave the Nazis control over women's groups in Germany. Now, the Nazis would spread their ideas about women, and by 1939, 1.7 million women had attended Nazi courses on subjects such as childcare, cooking, sewing. Now, the birth rate, as I said before, in Germany had been falling, and in 1900 there were 2 million births per year. By 1933, it had fallen to 1 million per year. The Nazis again feared fewer children meant fewer soldiers. Remember, this whole idea was having a greater Germany. So, a lot of the policies toward women are about promoting marriage, promoting procreation. So the law of encouragement of marriage, 1933. So you get a loan of up to 1,000 marks. Basically to encourage people to marry. Loans were only available if the woman or the wife stopped working, and each child born into the family meant a quarter of that loan was written off. So 4 children meant loans were repaid. Then you have the divorce laws. Now, if a wife could or would not have a child, then the husband could easily divorce them. It gave that power to the man. You've got the Mother's Cross, so this is an award given to the amount of children a woman had. Bronze for 4 to 5, silver for 6 to 7, gold for 8. Now, a Nazi youth had to salute wearers of the gold medal, and mothers of 10 had to name Hitler as the Godfather and name them Adolf. Then you've got Lebensborn. So this is the Fountain of Life programs, which was started by Himmler in 1935, and it provides nurseries with this financial aid for women who are children with SS men, and encourages breeding with the SS men as well. It was the idea to create the pure children. So there really are marriage kind of laws that you should all be looking to in any question that comes up on Nazi policies towards women. Now, the Nazis wanted to reduce women in work, and they used propaganda to try and influence this behavior. Remember, propaganda is a big aspect of this, and women were shown as wives and concentrate on the 3Ks. So this is Kinder, Küche, Kirche, which is children, kitchen, and the church. Now, Nazis then introduced policies to reduce the number of women at work. So women were banned as teachers, doctors, and civil servants. By 1934, 360,000 women had given up work. Women could not be a judge or a lawyer. Schoolgirls were trained for motherhood, not to work. Grammar schools preparing girls for university were banned, and women were encouraged to look plain. However, as German industry boomed, the Nazis kind of needed women in the workplace, so it starts to change. Now, a lot of you had a look at that source of women in the workplace. This is because industry is booming and Nazis needed women in the workplace. And remember, things like rearmament also meant that a lot of men were going into the army. So again, women needed to meet that work criteria. Okay, the young. Now, I guess the essential idea behind the Nazi policies towards the young is they want to create ready-made Nazis. Um, of course, they're in control now, but a lot of the adults are not actual Nazis. They're just kind of supporting out of fear mainly, or they just think the Nazis are the best bet. But the Hitler and the Nazis, they want to create the next generation to be purely loyal to the party, and this goes through the education system and the youth groups. So they believe boys and girls are different, but they have different roles and different strengths. And again, number 2 kind of highlights exactly what I've just said, because Hitler wants to create the 1,000-year Reich, okay, of just newly created Nazis. Again, this is a graphic just to show the ideal kind of boy and girl kind of education system. So Nazi youth groups. So Hitler banned all other youth groups other than the Nazi youth. They were to play sport. To play sport, you had to join Nazi youth. In 1939, it was made compulsory for all young Germans to join the Nazi youth groups from 10. So 6 to 10, you got the little fellows. 10 to 14, you had the German young people. 14 to 18, you've got the Hitler youth. Now, the Hitler Youth would swear loyalty, told about Nazi ideas. You had lessons on German heroes were taught and the evil of the Jews. They had a report on anyone who were disloyal to the Nazis, even their parents. There was high physical training, hiking, camping, sports competitions, military training, reading, signaling, training in specialized kind of navigational systems, naval training, arms. Aimed to mold character to the discipline to make ready-made Nazi soldiers. That was the idea. Now the girls, 10 to 14, you had the young maidens. 14 to 21, the League of German Maidens. You had to swear allegiance. You would also camp and go on marches, trained as housewives, taught racial hygiene to marry Aryan men. Then you had this education system that was built to just control and manipulate, to produce the next generation of pure Nazis. Long-term security for the Third Reich. Now the teachers, they could sack teachers and head teachers they didn't like. In one state, Rust, who was the head of Nazi education, he sacked 180. Teachers had to swear an oath of loyalty and join the Nazi Teachers League. Teachers were politically educated, which was a course they had to attend. So 200,000 by 1939. That's a good statistic to show the Nazis controlled education by controlling the teachers. Kids had to Nazi salute, start and end the lesson with Heil Hitler. And Nazi flags and decorations were in the classroom. Now in the curriculum, you've got new subjects, race studies, which you can imagine what that is. Maths was deemed more useful to Nazi ideas, so it was like it would highlight the burden nature of the undesirables, how much benefits you were paying them. PE was doubled. It was different for boys and girls. Textbooks had to be Nazi approved. Mein Kampf was compulsory. Speeches were played on the sound system. Now, the Nazis promised to stop the suffering many Germans had felt since the end of World War I and make the economy strong again. Unemployment would disappear and Germany would become an autarky, basically a self-sufficient system. And Hitler increased employment. So again, it's a way to really get his country working, get them all working towards a common goal. And Hitler believed unemployment was a wasted resource and a burden on society. He felt people who weren't helping in the country were just, what's the point in them? So he began these huge public works, which included hospitals, schools, public buildings, like the Olympic Stadium for 1936, the autobahns, which had 80,000 men working on them, rearmament. So they were responsible for the bulk of economic growth. Rearmament started almost as soon as Hitler came to power. Remember, he wanted to rip up that Treaty of Versailles, and he pretty much did so. This created millions of jobs for German workers. The NLS, so this is the RAD system really, meant all young men spent 6 months and were conscripted into the army. They were no longer counted as unemployment figures. So the RAD, the National Labour Service, this was paid work for unemployed members. You'd be working on the public works, roads, planting trees, training marshes. It was compulsory to serve, so 422,000 in 1935 gives highlights how many people were part of it. It wasn't very popular though. It was like an army again. Everything the Nazis do is really like an army, drilled, discipline. They had to wear uniforms, live in camps, go on parade. Pay was low, food was bad, conditions were bad. Some just saw it as military service. The Autobahn's a good one. So 7,000 mile of network of dual carriage roads. First stretch in 1935. 125,000 men were employed by 1938. 3,500 kilometers were then finished. Spending on public works grew by 18 billion marks to 38 billion by 1938, but it meant better roads, better bridges. This meant quicker transport for trade systems. The quicker connections and the more connections between the big cities mean that there's more trade going on, more goods being transported, and that creates jobs as well. That booms the economy. So it was very effective. Rearmament, so major policy. Remember, Treaty of Versailles limited it to 100,000, and this meant Hitler was defying it, and he announced military conscription, so young men had to serve in the armed forces. By 1939, you got 1.36 million, so they were in the armed forces, reducing unemployment. Hitler's armed forces, they needed arms, equipment, so Germany's spending increased from 3.5 billion to 26 billion. This was a huge boost in employment. People were working in aircraft construction, people were working in industry, arms building. So all this creates jobs, all this improves the economy. But then you've got the invisible unemployment as well. So, whilst Germany claimed to have full employment by 1939, a lot of groups of people were not actually included in these statistics. So, 1.4 million men in the army at this time. There were also a number of men working on public works schemes, Jews who were sacked and their jobs given to non-Jews. Women had to give up their jobs to men. Women and Jews were not counted in these statistics. People in part-time employment were counted full-time. And it's this whole idea of autarky. So again, just don't be afraid of this word. It just means being self-sufficient. It just means that a country does not have to rely on another country for resources. They make everything they need themselves. So if you read through that, you'll see how the system is changed to tighter controls over materials and the types of materials they are producing. There's a change in the living standards here. So despite the loss of freedom, life improved for a lot of ordinary people who were prepared to conform and look the other way to the atrocities that were going on. Nazi economic policies had these different effects on different. So again, employment. So more people in work meant more people had income, meant more people were spending money. This booms the economy. Wages improved in general. Wages in industry were much better than the RAD. Wages rose from 20% from 1933 to 39. Food prices also rose by 20%. Benefit of wages was cancelled out. The number of car owners trebled. Highly skilled workers did well, but lower earners had to use their extra wages to cover higher costs of living. On average, the working week for a German worker rose from 43 hours to 49 hours in 1939. Whilst wages went up, so did hours worked. We look at big businesses. When trying to get into power, the Nazis promised to tackle monopolies. Tendency of one company to hold all interest in one area of business, dominate the market. Monopolies control over 70%. So again, look at the rise of big businesses here. You can read through for the information. Smaller business, so there were rules on running of small businesses were tightened, which resulted in 20% of them closing. So look at the negatives. Now with farmers, they were one of the main sources of electoral support. Remember, the Nazis promised them protection from the communists. So there's a hereditary farm law, which prevented farms from being repossessed from their owners. So farming families had great security. Agricultural prices increased by 20%. And agricultural wages rose more quickly than those in the industry. But some do disagree about the levels at which life in rural regions actually increased. And here is the differences in the industrial workers. You've got the Labour Front, basically the Nazi version of the trade unions. These basically set wages, nearly always followed the wishes of the employers rather than the employees. So you've got the Strength and Joy campaign, you've got the Beauty of Labour, organisations to help Germans see that work was good. Strength and Joy with these rewards for free or cheap holidays and trips. And you've got the industrial workers and how everything helped for them. So guys, that is a complete run through of life in Germany. Again, pause it and read through. I've left all the content in there for you to read. So again, I'll bring out one more on the treatment of minorities, I think, and we'll finish there.